Welcome to Sleeplis Whispers and Where Fear Meets Insomnia. These are true horror stories, told for the sleepless souls who can't close their eyes. Every word you're about to hear, I swear to God, it's true. Tonight's story, the basement houri never thought a church basement could keep time like a bank ledger, but then I never thought enough about the things I carry. I signed up for the Thursday night pantry shift because bills don't ask about schedules and because Pastor Whitcomb's coffee was better than the fluorescent buzz at the deli. I told Megan I could cover for her, she had classes, and she squeezed my shoulder like it mattered. The Holloway church sits back from the street under a maple whose branches scrape the steeple. Inside, the basement smells of lemon cleaner, cardboard, and something older that no one mentions because it makes people uneasy at potlucks. There are folding chairs, a ping-pong table with one missing leg, a bookshelf full of outdated hymnals, and a narrow maintenance room with a door that stubbornly stuck when you pushed it. The volunteers call it the back closet, and they keep the story of it short. Pastor Whitcomb had a list taped to his clipboard. Pantry inventory, sweep clothes. Under that, in a hurried hand, he added, "If the maintenance room is open, do not go in." He laughed when he said it like a thin prop in a play. Nobody gave me the keys. The list made the rule official in my head. At 11:15, the volunteers left, laughing, trading gossip about bake sales and chorus practice. I stayed to finish the count. The radio up front played a late-night call-in show about grandparents and recipes. When I turned off the lights and sat with my thermos, the basement felt like a room that had been expected to sleep and decided not to. I found the cassette by accident. It was on a shelf in the maintenance room, wrapped in tape the way people wrap things they mean to forget. Someone had written "hour" on it in permanent marker. There was also a small chair facing the concrete wall and a candle stub in a dented tin. The tape player was older than me. I found batteries in the pantry and fed them in like a small ritual. The voice on the cassette was thin and patient. It didn't preach. It said, "You stay the hour. Do not speak when the steps come. Count what you carry." The tape had that rented vibe hiss like rain through cheap curtains. It felt like being given instructions to a game I hadn't signed up for. I should have walked out. Instead, I sat. The basement has a schedule that shows up in sounds. The furnace's stuttering cough, the loose vent cover that clicks twice, the mouse that rearranges boxes. At midnight, the small noises stitched themselves into footsteps. They weren't fast. They measured the floor like someone counted tiles with their shoes. At 11:58, the tape stopped and there was a silence so full it filled my ears. The door opened a fraction. The steps paused just outside. The shadow pooled along the jamb like oil. A voice, not the tape now, asked, "What do you hold?" It wasn't a polite question. It was ledger work. The building wanted accounting. My first instinct was to empty my pockets, to throw everything down on the chair in case the thing wanted coin. But the tape's instruction rang in my head. Count what you carry. I did. Keys, a grocery receipt, gum wrapper, a pressed note with someone's number. The corridor asked, "Which one will you give?" And the choice felt less like charity than a transaction where the terms were written by the walls. I handed over the receipt. The air around it moved as if a hand took it. The steps sighed and retreated. That was the pattern, the hallway inquired, I offered. Once I started the basement's accounting, it kept asking. A button from a jacket, a child's sticker, lint. Trifles were accepted like currency. Each time I set something on the chair, the feeling was not of loss but of lightening. Like setting down a backpack that's been digging into your shoulders all day. Time changed. The ledger didn't demand much, small things mostly. But then it escalated in a practical, clerical way. I left a lighter and later realized my old watch was gone. I found a note in my notebook in my own handwriting. Check pockets, but I don't remember writing it. I began to test the rules. Leave a paperclip and the steps would take it. Leave a key and the next morning I'd misplace a different key in real life. The basement accounted in equivalents. Megan laughed the first time I told her. She came with me on a Saturday, half curious and half wanting to prove my nerves were worse than reality. We walked down the concrete steps together. The maintenance room looked normal. No cassette, no candle. A faint ring of wax marked where something had burned. She teased me for being dramatic. We left and I pretended the thing had ended there. But the ledger was patient. It doesn't shout. It balances. After 3 weeks, I noticed small vanishings. The pen used for deposits, a quarter I left on the dresser, the photograph clipped in a wallet. Each loss left me with a particular cold, the sense of a place keeping score. I started carrying a tin of objects I thought I might need to trade. Ticket stubs, a cafe bean, a child sticker with a cartoon face. I left them like offerings, and sometimes I left a folded scrap that said nothing more than, "For the book." Each time a drawer at home would be one item lighter. One night, stubborn, I recorded on my phone. I set it on the chair near the dented tin. The steps came. The corridor asked. I counted and placed items down. Later, when I listened, the file had a small clear sound like paper being kissed, and then a silence that wasn't emptiness so much as an acceptance. I realized I had been trying to prove the basement by capturing it. Some things don't sound like evidence. They sound like weather. The arc of it was not sudden. It didn't demand my house or my name. It required small currency, habitual things, the sort of minor ledger entries people don't notice until later. My life adjusted. I stopped stuffing receipts into my pockets. I emptied my purse when I came home. I counted and cataloged before sleep. There was a comfort to the ritual. Control in a place that otherwise did what basements do. Hold the building's shame. Sometimes I think the building was never hungry. Maybe it was bored. Maybe it liked collecting the weight of what people considered unimportant. The tape's voice had said they keep account. That phrasing matters. It wasn't malice, it was bookkeeping. The strangest part is how it taught me to care about small things. When my grandfather's watch went missing the week after I started the tin trick, I was sure the basement had taken it as an exchange. The family dinner that followed was quiet. My aunt's voice touched on memory like a hymn. I found the watch later in a coat pocket of my sister's, where she'd put it for safekeeping. It had a new scuff, and the hands moved like they had been wound by someone else. There is a mercy to certain rules. If the ledger asks for small weights, it will not take what it cannot tally. It will not take the names, not the faces shown in family photos. It prefers objects with edges. I learned which things were safe to carry and which were not. I learned a modest discipline: count, hand over, leave room in your pockets for air. I told Pastor Whitcomb once casually about the cassette. He listened with a face that made cross shapes with his hands. He didn't laugh. Instead, he said, "Old buildings remember. Sometimes they keep record of what we refuse to let go." He spoke like a man who had cataloged more than donations. I didn't know if that was comfort or warning. In the end, the change in me was small but absolute. I'm not a braver person. I'm quieter with my hands. I can't say the basement saved me or took me. It rearranged what I thought belonged to me. There is a ledger in the dark parts of towns, it seems, and some of us put coins into it without knowing it's a bank. If you ever find the cassette, or a stub of candle on a dented tin, do this. Count everything you carry. Say it out loud, give up one small thing. It will not be elegant. It will not be fair. But the exchange is precise. The building wants numbers, not names. It will take a button for a coin, a sticker for a receipt, a paperclip for a lighter. It'll balance itself and let you go lighter. That is how I learned the basement's arithmetic. And when the steps come, when the tape goes quiet and the shadows line up at the door, don't speak unless you mean to bargain. Some hours ask only for small debts. Others do not. Maybe there are worse ledgers. Maybe there are basements that ask for more. All I can tell you is what the Holloway kept. A faithful counting of small things. A clerical patience that taught me to take only what I could afford to lose. It sounds like an odd blessing, but sometimes a rule is the only kindness a building offers. If you're still awake, listen closely, not another true horror begins. Story 2. The basement hoary didn't think a church could be secretive. Churches are supposed to be open. Pews, hymnals, casseroles. I signed up to help because the pantry needed hands and because nights at the warehouse had started to feel like the same song on repeat. Megan said I was good with people, which translates to you're dependable when volunteers say it. I wanted to be useful, and also to be somewhere that smelled like coffee instead of grease. Holloway Community. Church sits 2 blocks from a hollowed stretch of Route 9, under a steeple that leans like an old man's posture. The basement is a shallow world. Concrete floor, exposed pipes, folding tables, a ping-pong table with a missing leg. There's a maintenance closet tucked behind the hymn board with a door that clicks wrong when you close it. The kind of tiny failure everyone knows to avoid. The pastor's note on the volunteer clipboard reads, "Pantry, sweep, lockup. If maintenance is open, contact pastor." He adds the last part with a smile so thin it doesn't reach his eyes. My first shift was ordinary. We sorted cans, packed bags, handed out coffee in paper cups that steamed in the cold. People came and went with quick thank yous. After dinner rush, the volunteers left. I stayed to count supplies and take inventory while the church settled into the thin, private hours that belong to buildings. The radio at the desk played an NPR piece about droughts, its voice sliding into ambient noise. I found the cassette in the maintenance closet, next to a box of mismatched light bulbs and a dented tin marked donations. Someone had scrawled hour in black marker across the tape's case. It felt like a child's label for a serious toy. There was a small folding chair facing the blank cinder block wall, and a stub of candle in a dented tin ashtray. The tape player was older than the volunteers. I found batteries in a kitchen drawer and, on a whim, pressed play. The voice on the cassette was mid-aged and flat, like the person who reads instructions for moving companies in the middle of the night. "Stay the hour," it said. "If the steps come, don't speak. Count what you hold." The hiss between sentences sounded like breath. The instructions felt like a test I hadn't consented to. I should have left. Instead, I sat on the folding chair with the thermos between my knees and the tape trailing its soft command. The basement has a particular acoustics. Vents whisper, pipes cough, and the furnace mutters like an old man clearing his throat. At midnight, the small noises stitch themselves into a pattern. Footsteps down the hall, slow and deliberate. They sounded like someone measuring tile with a shoe. At 11:58, the tape quieted. A shadow pooled under the maintenance door. The steps stopped. A voice, not on the cassette, not the pastor's, asked like a clerk at closing, "What do you carry?" It wasn't cruel. It was methodical, the way rain asks a roof for drip yield. My first impulse was to dump my pockets, to free myself of whatever made the building interested. But the tape's order was clear: count. It seemed like a strange etiquette. I listed aloud: keys, a grocery receipt, a folded note with a number from someone who wanted to meet, a smooth stone from a walk I'd taken that afternoon. The hall waited, then asked which one I'd give. I chose the receipt because receipts feel like temporary things. They keep transactions, but not people. When I set it on the dented tin, the air shifted as if a hand had taken it. The steps retreated. The tape clicked back on by itself. That was the contract. The hall asked, I offered. Some trades were very small: a paperclip, a sticker, a child's rubber eraser. Each time the building took something, my pockets felt lighter, and my breath found more room to move. There was no thunder or screaming, just the small clerical business of removal. I started to learn the basement's arithmetic. It wanted small vessels, things with edges. Once I left a lighter the size of a thumb. The next morning, my father's old watch was missing from the drawer where I'd put it. Once I left a paper clip and found the pen on my nightstand gone by noon. The ledger was elastic. It balanced in equivalence, not strictly like for like, but by weight of memory. It did not take names. It took things we carry without thinking. After a week, I began bringing a tin of offerings, trivial objects I could spare, and I left one each time the steps came. A movie ticket, a child's plastic ring, a coffee shop foam heart. The building accepted them with a quiet impartiality. It felt less like punishment than bookkeeping. When I told Pastor Whitcomb, he didn't laugh. He folded his hands and said, "Old houses keep score. They note what we're fused to let go." His voice was even. There was a ring to it that suggested more memory than his forehead allowed. I left it alone and tried to make sense of my life in smaller denominations. Curiosity is a bad accountant. One night I brought my phone and recorded. I set it beside the cassette and turned therecorder on. The steps came. The hall asked its ledger question. I counted objects aloud, my voice small in the room. When I played the file later, there was the tape's hiss. The small clink of items, and then a sound that isn't a sound until you name it. The space between an inhale and exhale stretched like a held breath. It had a pressure to it. Not a voice, but a feeling like pages turning in a closed book. People in town noticed odd vanishings. A coin would be missing from a jar. A receipt disappeared from the pocket of a coat left on a chair. Not everyone goes through pockets the way I started to. I found myself cataloging losses. A button gone from a sleeve, a lighter gone from a desk drawer. The losses were never dramatic. They were irritants, the kind that make you check your habit rather than call the police. Megan came down once with me, more skeptical than afraid. She flicked the light on, took in the dented tin, and said, "You're letting a basement boss you now?" Her laugh had a thinness like tape. We sat and waited. The cassette wasn't there. The chair faced the wall like any chair. For the first time, I felt ridiculous. We left with our shoes echoing in the stairwell, and I told myself daylight would fix the edges. But the ledger doesn't care for daylight. It is patient. It keeps records like a municipal office and will take time to collect what it requires. Over the months, I found small things missing from home. Receipts, ticket stubs, a key I always kept by the door. I started to practice lightness. I stopped pocketing things. I learned to set my wallet on the shelf by the door when I came in and empty my pockets at night on the kitchen table, naming my things aloud to make sure I still had them. The arc of it was subtle. I didn't get heroic. I got practical. The basement taught me to be picky with possession. It taught me that certain things you can live without if it means your pockets stay lighter. It didn't choose to take what's most precious. Photographs, names, faces remained. It wanted the little burdens that weigh us down without notice. One night, months in, I left an old Polaroid of my mother on the tin. I shouldn't have. It wasn't trivial. The steps came and paused. The basement asked, as it always did. The air felt thicker. I held my breath as if bargaining needed breath. When I returned, the Polaroid was face down beside the chair, the image darkened by a smear I didn't recognize. I kept it anyway. People make choices we don't always understand. There are nights I still go in for counts. It's a strange ritual. I take the thermos, the recorder, my tin of trivialities, and sit like an accountant before a ledger. I say aloud what I hold. The walls answer with steps in the quiet that is the acceptance of entries. Sometimes I leave an item and the town later returns a thing I didn't know I missed. A watch found in a jacket pocket at a charity sale. A child's sticker rediscovered in a cereal box. The trades have a logic not of cruelty but of balance. The Holloway keeps accounts and sometimes pays out a small inconvenient mercy. When people ask me if the basement is haunted, I tell them it's less ghost and more municipal order. If you believe in supernatural bookkeeping, then maybe it's haunted. If you prefer simpler words, call it memory or consequence. Either way, it changed me. I stopped letting small things pile in my pockets. I learned the awkward gratitude of shallow forgetting. If you ever find a cassette labeled hour or a stub of candle in a dented tin, do this. Count what you carry. Say it out loud. Let the building take one small thing. It is not elegant. It is not fair often, but the ledger wants numbers, not names, and the arithmetic is precise. That is how the basement asked and how I learned to answer. If you're still awake, listen closely. Another true horror begins. Story 3. The Bellkeeper's Houri signed up to run the after-service lockup at St. Augustine's because money and an extra line on an application are the same thing to me. The church sits 2 blocks off the main road, a squat brick building with a steeple that leans like someone who's carried a lot of weather. Inside, the sanctuary smells like lemon oil and old hymn paper. Downstairs, the basement is a small, separate world, concrete floor, exposed beams, folding chairs stacked like sleeping fish, and a maintenance closet that never quite fits its frame right. Pastor Holden handed me a heavy ring of keys and a clipboard. Just inventory and lockup, he said, his voice buttered with habit. Then he hesitated and added, if the basement doors open after the last car goes, sit the hour. Don't answer anything that calls. Count what you carry. He said it with the worn-out tone people use for town gossip and practical warnings. I laughed it off and took the thermos he offered. The volunteers left in drips. Casseroles to pick up, school pickups to make, the private errands that make up adult life. I did the work that keeps buildings dignified. Stacked cans, a sweep with a broom that sighs, a quick check of donated clothes. The radio in the foyer played a morning show rerun about porch plants that never die. Small talk made the house feel ordinary. Found the cassette by accident in the maintenance. Room between a box of light bulbs and a dented tin marked MISC. Someone had scrawled hour on its case and placed a folding chair facing the cinder block wall. Beside the chair, a stub of candle sat in a small ashtray. The tape player looked older than the youth pastor. I fed it batteries like an idiot and pressed play. A man's voice filled the room. Calm, flat, practiced. Sit the hour, he said. If the steps come, do not speak. Name what you carry. The tape hissed at the edges like a kettle left on low. It sounded like a neighbor reading instructions through a wall. I should have left. Instead, curiosity calcified into obligation, and I sat. Buildings have their own timetables. At midnight, the furnace did a slow cough and an old pipe tapped twice. Those sounds rearranged themselves into steps, slow, methodical, a foot measuring tile the way a hand checks bricks. At 11:58, the maintenance door shifted and a voice, thin as a ledger and half-wind, asked, "What do you have?" It wasn't cruel. It was clerical. Counting is a small human comfort. I named the things in my pockets aloud. Keys, a crumpled receipt from the grocery, a child's sticker flattened at the corner, a folded note with a girl's name on it. The hall waited. "Which will you give?" it asked. I left the receipt because receipts feel like the kind of thing one can part with. The air moved like a page closing. The pattern took on a life of its own. The tape's instruction and the basement's ledger worked like a municipal office. Object cataloged, entry balanced. The items it wanted were trifles: paper clips, a bent button, a plastic charm from a cereal box. You left something small and later found a small absence elsewhere. A lighter gone from the kitchen, a quarter missing from a jar. Sometimes the exchange returned a small gift, a coin found in the couch, a child's toy pushed into a coat pocket at the thrift store. I didn't tell people until I couldn't avoid the threat of losses. Megan joked at first. "Now you're a sacrificial clerk?" But when her cheap ring disappeared from her coat, the joke stopped. Pastor Holden folded his hands when I told him and said, "Old buildings keep records in odd ways." His voice had the patient resignation of a man who has watched a town trade its oddities for quiet. That was all the sermon I got. The ledger the basement kept wasn't a monster. It had no appetite for faces. Photographs remained mostly untouched, though sometimes a Polaroid would appear face down with a smear across the sky. It preferred objects we treat as disposable until their absence becomes an ache. Receipts, ticket stubs, cheap plastic charms. The trades were associative, not literal. Leave a paperclip. The next morning, your pen is gone. Hand over a sticker. A scarf disappears from a coat on the chair. Once I tried to test it, I refused to give anything. The tape's voice was patient. The hall's question widened like a mouth. That week, my sister's watch vanished from the dresser where she left it when she crashed on my couch. I don't know if withholding teaches the ledger to take elsewhere, or if the ledger keeps its own bookkeeping regardless of my stubbornness. The arithmetic didn't care for my experiments. The ritual altered my habits. I began to keep a small tin by the front door with things I could spare. Bent keys, cheap lighters, a child's marble. I emptied my pockets on the kitchen table and named the contents aloud because naming feels like anchoring. The act calmed me. Saying was proof. It was a tiny liturgy without hymns. There were nights when the maintenance door was closed and the cassette gone, and the basement seemed merely storage. Then a volunteer would complain about a missing coin, and I would know the ledger had been at work while we slept. The town turned small vanishings into neighborhood gossip and charity drives. People called it bad luck or thieves. The police shrugged at petty reports. Municipal realities are allergic to mysteries they cannot prove. On a rainy November, a woman came with a frozen look on her face and a thick winter coat cradled to her chest. She had a photograph wrapped in wax paper and laid it on the dented saucer by the chair. "They told me to leave this," she said in a voice like someone who had rehearsed apology. She set the photo, and the tape's voice that night said something gentler than ledger tallying. "Settle." Later, a neighbor found a watch tucked into the pocket of a donated coat and brought it to the coffee cart with a half smile and a question in her voice. How does something like this show up? The woman who'd left the photo cried like relief was a small animal. Sometimes the ledger returned things in ways that looked like the town's kindness. Other times it rearranged losses into curiosities. Once I left my grandfather's old pocket watch, heavy and dented, thinking sentimental things might be immune. The basement took it with no ceremony. Weeks later, a woman brought the watch to the church coffee cart with a scratch across its face and a polite, "I found this in a coat." The watch kept ticking. Not all reciprocations made sense. There were nights I left a child's sticker, and later my neighbor's scarf disappeared. There were times I tried to trade more than the ledger asked, left a photograph, a keepsake, and woke to find the photograph face down and smudged. Photographs sometimes carried fingerprints like dirty pages and names blurred as if someone had tried to protect faces. Pastor Holden told me sometime later that the building asks for ballast, not history. It wants the small weights, he said, not names. not faces. He offered to say a blessing, an old man blessing a ledger he couldn't quite admit to understanding. I accepted because sometimes practice is what steadies people. The ledger didn't feel malicious. It felt clerical. It took like a town takes a tax. Regular, boring, and inevitable. It taught me to be stingy with my pockets. I stopped stuffing every receipt into my back pocket and started to put photographs in a drawer I locked. I learned what to name aloud and what to hide. Once I left nothing and dared the steps. I shouted into the maintenance room, "Take my watch, then. Take everything you want." The silence that answered was not dramatic. The watch sat where it was, but later that night my neighbor lost a child's charm from a backpack. I didn't know then if my defiance had misdirected the ledger's attention or simply nudged the town's accounting. In time, the small discipline became habit. I keep a tin now when I leave the house. I count what I carry before I climb the church steps. I say each item's name aloud. It is not bravery. It's bookkeeping for a small life. The ledger has its own mercy. Keep the faces, give the ballast, and the rest slides past like a day. If you ever find a cassette labeled hour, a dented saucer, and a chair facing a cinder block wall in a church's maintenance room, do this. Count what you carry, say it aloud, and leave one small thing. Keep photographs and names close to your chest. The building will balance its columns and let you go a little lighter. If you're still awake, you've just survived another true horror story from Sleeplis Whispers. Subscribe, and stay close, because tomorrow night, I swear to God, it gets worse.